Hello everyone. Today I will be showing you a game between Nimzowitsch and Checkley. It was played in 1927. And let's see how they played. Nimzowitsch was white. He opened with e4. So he played with e6. Then e4, d5. So we have a French defense. And after e5, black standard reply is c5. And now Nimzowitsch plays a move queen to g4. You will not see this very often, at least not today. So what is the idea of this move? Well, white is going to sacrifice his d4 pawn and he's going to try to fortify his e5 pawn, and he's going to hope that this pawn will give him some space, and also he's hoping for some piece play on the king side if possible. But that doesn't necessarily needs to lead to an attack. It's just more like of a restraining way of playing. You will see what I mean. There is a different version of this gambit that was fairly popular in between two world wars, or in the beginning of the 20th century. That is to start with knight f3, and when black takes on d4, you develop your bishop here. I remember watching some of the games by Paul Keres. He was playing this several times with great results. And the only problem here is that if black knows that he's supposed to attack white's e5 pawn very early, he can get a very good position with the move f6 now or a few moves later. So that's the only downside. If black allows you to keep this pawn here and to develop your pieces, then this gambit makes a lot of sense. But the only problem here is, at least in my opinion, that black can early counter strike in the center and get a very good position, or even a better one. Okay, that's another version of the same thing. So in this game we have queen g4. Black took. Now white developed his knight on f3, and after knight c6, the bishop comes to d3. And knight g7, intending to go on g6 and put more pressure on e5, and also cover the g7 pawn. Because if you would, for example, want to develop this bishop now, that's not so great, because then this pawn will hang. That's why black goes knight g7 with the idea of blocking the influence of the queen to the g7 square. I just want to mention that if you play f6 here, unlike in the other version of this gambit, here white can play queen h5, because the queen is outside of this knight, it's not on d1, it can give this check. And this is a little bit of an unpleasant check, because if you block, white can just take this pawn, because if you take, you will lose a rook, at least. So therefore, on this check, you will have to do something like this. And this looks a little bit awkward, although it could be played, definitely. But anyway, here f6 has less power than in the knight f3, for knight f3 variation. So knight g7 was played, f6 was not black's choice, and white castled. After that, black continued with his plan, and white had to support this pawn a little bit more, and after queen c7, there are three pieces attacking this e5 pawn, so white is only defending it 2 times. Therefore, he went queen g3. Now he is defending it 3 times with the knight, with the queen, and with the rook. So black cannot take there. And now we can see, since black didn't push f6, white got a position in which he is somehow restraining black's play with this e5 pawn. Yes, he has one pawn less because he lost the pawn on d4, but since this pawn is very well protected, we don't need a pawn on d4 actually. And you will see what will happen later, but actually this is a pretty decent position for white. It's not better or anything, but it's more pleasant to play. Black continued with bishop c5, which might not be the best move. He could have gone something like this, and maybe white would push, and the game goes on. Or he could even consider giving the pawn back with a move like this, and getting some sort of liberation, because he will exchange one piece and lessen the pressure that white is having on his position. But okay, he chose to go bishop c5, and now white goes h4. Well, the idea of this move is obvious. You want to go h5, so you want to put your pawn here and to kick this knight back. When you do that, then there will be less pressure on this pawn. Also, this one will be hanging, and it kind of fits into overall white strategy to pressure black's position from all sides, from the center and from the flank, to gain more space and create some active play. And now black has made a mistake. So Checkley went king f8. It is definitely not a good move. He should have castled. That's a more logical move and a much better alternative. I am not sure why he was scared of this move. Actually, he was probably scared of this move only now. I have noticed, because maybe he was thinking if he goes here, that white will do something like this, where he has to go back, and so probably that was the reason. But what he missed definitely is that after h5, he has a great piece sacrifice that is going to give him a really good position. He can take on e5 with this knight, and when white retakes, he can just go f6. And now, because this knight is hanging, when it takes here, you can take on g3. And now it doesn't matter if white gives this check first, or if he instead just takes the queen on d3. In any case, black will end up a piece down, but for that piece he has a lot of pawns. So if you count, you will see 1, 2, 3, 6, and here we have 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. So it's 2 pawns for a piece, but these 2 pawns are doubled, so that makes this central group of pawns very strong. When they start pressing forward, they will really strangle the white's light pieces. And if you think a little bit, in a position like this, where are you going to put your knight from b1 and bishop from c1? They don't really have any prospects for the future. I mean, you would have to probably make some breaks or do something else, but it really doesn't look so impressive for white. If this pawn was, back on f2, that would be much better, because that pawn could control the advancement of this pawn. But this way, there is really nothing to stop black from going all the way to e4, and then white will have trouble with space. So black missed that kind of sacrifice that he could get with castling and play a bad move, which is king to f8. So white replied in a logical sense, and black went knight g7. One more important thing is now this move doesn't work because white will just take it, and if you go f6, because your king is on a bad square, compared to g8 square, it is a bad square. Now white has a simple tactic, knight b6, at the same time giving a check, and that was not possible in the variation where black castled, because that would not be a check. And this way, when you give a check, you open this diagonal, and this queen is gonna drop, so black is completely lost. That's why knight takes e5 doesn't work, so black had to go to e7. And now white pushes h6 and makes more weaknesses in black's camp, actually makes the dark square complex very weak and also gains more space. And now really a good move by Nimzowitsch. He pushed a small move, but really a good one. The idea of this move is to play b4, take more space, and then you can either go to b2 or continue with the bishop to g5, but the point is you want to push black off the board. And in order to prevent that, black has to go a5. But now this b5 square is weakened, and white can use that in the future. Also, not to mention, we can also mention that it's going to be hard for black to organize any setup where he has a pawn on b5 and try to put a knight here on c4, because white is just covering this square. So a3 was there to provoke a5 and weaken the b5 square, which will be useful later. Now, after white has done that on the queen side, he develops his bishop, and this bishop is threatening to enter on the f6 square, and let's say you do a nothing move just to show the idea. Then white could enter here. This rook is hanging, it has to move, and after knight g5, black can just resign. This pawn is going to drop, then the knight will go back, and the h pawn will queen. That's why, a little bit back, you cannot play a nothing move. You have to stop bishop f6, otherwise you're just lost. So black went knight g8. Yes, it's a backward move, but he had to do that. And now look at this position. Only for one pawn, white has gained so much space, so much control over the dark squares, so much lead in development. Yeah, he needs to do something with these two guys, but look at this rook and this knight. They're just miserable. Also, not to mention, the king is stuck here and it might become a target in the future. So white continues to develop his pieces, and now black tries to break through. Actually, not to break through, but to break free. If he would wait, if he wouldn't try to somehow break this strangler on e5, then if nothing else, white could use not this knight, but this knight. He could improve this knight. He could go to f1, then to h2, and then to g4, and eventually to f6 if allowed. And that would really be devastating. So black chose to fight, to try to somehow break this strengthening, how to say, suffocating play of white. So f6. Now, taking this pawn would justify black's intentions. Let's say you take on f6, then black can exchange queens and attack you here on g3. And once you deal with that, he will go king f7, knight f6, and all of a sudden he can even be better. Well, he will probably not be better because why white would do something in the meantime. But the thing is, white would lose his grip that he had. So therefore, white didn't take. He could, for example, remove the bishop and then do something about that. But okay, he didn't choose that. He chose knight to b3, an intermediate move, which is good, but I still think bishop h4 was better. But okay, let's see what black did. He wanted to save this pawn, so he didn't want to move this bishop back, and he played b6. And only now, when this knight is here ready to do some operations in the future regarding taking on d4 or on c5, depending on the situation, only now white takes on f6. And you will see the difference when this knight is here instead of here. So that and also when this pawn is moved, so even the position of this knight is weakened. I know it doesn't make much sense now, but the position is very complicated, so you might understand this a little bit better once a couple of more moves are played, so you can actually get the ideas that players had here, actually that Nimzowitsch had here. Now black took on g3. Okay, but let's say that he didn't want to take and that he just removed his bishop. Well, then white would simply go here and this knight will stay there at least for some time. And if you don't do nothing, white is just gonna play bishop b5, take you here, collect here, or push f7 in some variations. So let's say you try to take advantage of your strong pawn center and push e5 with a threat on e4. Well, this is how the game might continue. White would go bishop b5, and then let's say you protect that knight, because if you don't, white is threatening to take, and then take on e5, breaking your beautiful center, and later this pawn will drop and this king is going to be in trouble. So let's say you go bishop d7, now a simple exchange, and now a beautiful move, bishop f4, putting more pressure on e5, and if you take this bishop, then the knight comes to d4, threatening to give a check to the king and attack the queen at the same time to fork them. So let's say the bishop goes back, and now even though white is a piece down, it's just the activity of his pieces that makes it possible for him to finish off the black pair. Now black cannot stop knight e6 check with winning the queen. If he goes, let's say here, this is still a check because the queen is attacking the king, and then the queen will drop. And let's say you go down there, if nothing else, you can still give this check and pick up the queen, and actually pick up even more material here. But the thing is, even if you don't, you still have a queen against two minor pieces and an open position of the king. So this was a little bit complicated, but it just shows how many possibilities there are for a white player, regardless of what black tries. So okay, instead of that, black exchanged queens, white had to take. And now black played bishop d6, trying to take this pawn. If, for example, he would play a4, trying to strengthen this spot by forcing white to take, and then taking here. At first glance, it looks like, hey, what is this? We have a mass of pawns here, like in that variation where black sacrificed a piece in the beginning of the game, just in the variation, and it looks like he's going to push e5, e4, and he's just better. Actually, he's not going to push e5 so easily, because this square is very good, well controlled, and also white has tactical means to open the position a little bit and use his development advantage and his better positioning of the pieces. It can start with the move f7, and when black takes that pawn, you can go bishop b5, and if this knight moves, this knight will come to e5, the rook will come to f1, it will just be terrible. And if you protect that knight, still you can exchange, and it's really hard to say what can black do against the other rook coming to f1. Then this one will hang. If you block, it can be won by the pawn move on g4. So this is really not the great way to play. So f7 would be devastating here. That's why here black didn't push a4, but instead went with the bishop to d6. And now bishop b5. Now you can see the point of the move knight b3 earlier that was provoking the move b7 to b6, because now this knight is loose, so something has to be done about it. If you just protect it, if nothing else, white can just exchange and put a knight here and then win this pawn, and black will stay still with this trapped knight. If nothing else, probably there is something even better. But okay, black went to the side, and now we regain one of our pawns, and also we improve the position of this knight. There is a threat to this pawn later also, after we deal with this bishop. But let's see. So here black played king f7, protecting e6, but let's say he tried to push this knight, thinking, okay, if this knight goes somewhere, let's say it goes here, we're just gonna win this bishop. Well, white was prepared for that also. He was planning to go bishop c6, attacking the rook, and let's say that that bishop was taken, then the knight would come in, and as you can see, this pawn is hanging. It is attacked by the knight and by the rook, and it is defending only by the bishop. If you lose this pawn, then this knight will come here and probably here, and this will just be terrible. So let's say you push, because you cannot protect it otherwise. Now comes a really nice move, c4. So this is a common theme. Your opponent has two connected pawns. You can break them by some side moves like this, trying to lure one of those pawns into leaving the protection of the other ones, and then in the end you pick up both of them, maybe. So let's say if black would take, white could go like this, activate the rook, and let's say the bishop drops back because it was hanging. If you, for example, take the knight, the rook will take the bishop with an overwhelming position of white's pieces. So let's say you go to c7. Well, now the knight comes to d4. Let's say, just an example, you can even start sacrificing material. Let's say he takes your rook, you can give a check, and now take the bishop, and now look at this position. This rook is hanging, there is a threat of knight e5, followed with knight e6 mate. There are also some other threats, like rook here, and attacking the bishop and entering on d7. It's just terrible. So let's go a few moves back. Uh, these moves, maybe they look a little bit hard to find, and yes, some of them they are hard to find, like c4, but breaking this pawn chain. But actually, they are very logical. If you are a little bit deeper into the position, they are very logical moves. Just activating the pieces, making some in-between moves, and making threats towards the opposing player. So that would happen if, for example, black would take here. What about moving the rook from attack? Well then, white has a really nice move, that is knight b5. And this knight is trapped, so it has to act. It can either take this knight or take this bishop. If you take the knight, we just take back, and then we put another rook on d4 and just put a lot of pressure on these two pawns, and still these two pieces are not playing, and that's gonna play its role. And if you take this bishop, we can just retake here and just look at this position. There is f7 coming, followed by bishop f6, winning this rook, and there is pretty much nothing that black can do to stop all that. So that was about this move e5, trying to win the bishop on b5, but black didn't play that. He went for king f7, which is not going to help him also. Now a really good move by white, c4. Again, we see a breakthrough. You want to... So this is the only thing that holds black from not resigning, that he has these two pawns that are preventing white's pieces from delivering a mate or winning some major material. And with this move, we are breaking the last line of defense in black's camp. Let's see if sorry, he didn't play that. He played that, but if he would take on c4, you just simply take with the bishop. And how is he going to defend this e6 pawn? There is no way to defend. There are three attackers, the bishop, the knight, and the rook, and there are only two defenders, the knight and the bishop and the king. And one of the pieces, probably the knight, is going to hop in, then that piece is going to threaten the discover check. That is just a lost position for the black player. Therefore, he tried to kick this knight, and let's say if white will move, then he could take here, and when you take, he might have survived here. Although that would not probably be good either, but white had something else in mind. He sacrificed a piece, and black had to take it, but now the bishop removes himself from the attack square, and at the same time pushes the black king backwards. And look at this king side. It's still the same. I mean, black tried to improve on it, but now he is back where he started. And this knight will have really hard time entering the game. So even though white is a piece down, he is practically not a piece down, because all he needs to do is activate this rook, and then his two rooks with his three light pieces will just dominate the board and execute the black's king or win some material or something. Even worse, he has a move like this, f7, and now this knight cannot move. I mean, if you go here, you will just be taken. Same goes for this square. And if you go to knight to e7, very simple move, bishop f6, asking this rook where it will go. It has no squares. He can give himself for a pawn, but that's the best he can do. So you see, this, you are a piece down, but as I said earlier, this is really not a real sacrifice. I mean, it is, but practically it's almost like you are a piece up, or even more. Okay, so black tried to develop, and now white was really cool. He didn't take on g8. He wants to keep this strangle on the black's position. So he goes knight d4, and he was pinned. That's not a problem. You just defend that knight on d4 and develop your last piece, and now the end is near. So black is trying to put more pressure here, and this would make sense if white would make some kind of defensive move. But now, since this knight would be lost, actually it can be lost immediately, like taking with the bishop, but just first an in-between move, taking on d8 with a check, and then taking the knight. And now, as you can see, all of a sudden we are from position a piece down, we are a piece up. So there was not too much incorrectness in me saying that we are a piece up, because now we are really a piece up. Even though a few moves ago we were a piece down, there was so much activity and the black's pieces were so backwardly placed that we were actually a piece up, practically. There was one more move and now black resigned. There is nothing to stop this pawn from gaining more material, and if you take it now, there is just this simple move. If black takes, white will take the bishop, and if you give check, we can just go back, and we are now two pieces up with no compensation, and that was basically it. Um, Black resigned here. I hope you enjoyed this game, and goodbye.